You see my screen?
It's coming up now. There it is. Got it.
Okay. Well, thanks, Rhett, for having me. I am excited to talk about civic assemblies. I am part of Public Democracy Los Angeles, which is a volunteer-run coalition dedicated to making a more representative, equitable, and responsive culture of democracy for all Angelinos. But today, without loss of generality, we can just let LA equal the OC, pretend we are the public democracy of Orange County. And here, before we get going, I just want to ask if anyone saw the news the other day. Report confirms anyone who really likes a politician is insane. This is from America's finest news source, The Onion. So it is parody. But while Public Democracy LA cannot actually officially endorse any policies, as our tax status allows us, and we are currently seeking to work alongside politicians, I will say that humans everywhere are ready for change. This is a poll from Fair Representation LA. So yes, this was conducted in LA, but I believe these results likely generalize. They claim that 84% think big money contributors have too much influence over city government. 71% think people like themselves have too little influence over elected officials. 81% think there's a need for serious government reforms. I kind of hate offering statistics without a real thorough deep dive into that. That comes from my sort of nerdy math background, but this does match up with my own personal experience. And here's some more anecdotal evidence of traditional community involvement. That's a picture of me at a planning commission in my hometown of Los Alamitos. I may have been the youngest person in the room. I was probably one of the only non-homeowners. I texted a bunch of friends, but they couldn't make a Wednesday night at 6 p.m. It was a 3-hour meeting where we spent 20 minutes talking about trash can placement, and it's pretty scary to get up and talk in front of people. I'm talking in front of people right now, and it's a little scary. So there's a lot of drawbacks to the traditional community method. I've also been engaged in activism for the past 2 years, and I say that activism is a rough hobby. I've seen frequent burnout. A lot of activists are just fueled by negative emotions or personal trauma, which, while they have their place, it's not always the perspective from which you want to be making decisions for the general welfare. I've also been on several one bylaws committee now, and part of many Robert's rules decision-making processes, and there's paperwork and bureaucracy. There's also, at the end of the day, you need to fund your activities, reliance on wealthy donors. And once you've made it past all of these hurdles, you're still forced to play the political game. I have had so many friends get all excited about, oh, I talked to this city council person or this state senator, and they're maybe possibly going to support our bill that is a watered down version of what we really want, but it could happen. And maybe it does happen sometimes. Small wins are possible. And I believe big wins are also possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't really even be doing what I'm doing. But they are quite rare, and it is a struggle. So can we do better? Public Democracy LA advocates for civic assemblies. Civic assemblies are formed by randomly selecting members of the community to address issues of the general welfare. This term sortition is going to come up several times. In governance, sortition is the selection of public officials or jurors at random, i.e. by lottery, in order to obtain a representative sample. It's kind of a weird term. We actually, at Public Democracy LA, we kind of try to avoid this term, but the nerd in me loves it, so I had to feature it front and center. And it's only really half of the story of a civic assembly. You can see here on the left, we have a lottery ball machine, and that sort of demonstrates how every member of the community could be chosen randomly. Therefore, it is fundamentally democratic. So, therefore, you have a democratic lottery. This creates a microcosm of the public and reduces common barriers to participation. However, uh, this method serves really well, like in the sciences of sampling a population, to let us measure something. So the question is, what exactly are we trying to measure? Well, we want to know what people want if they had the time and resources to think through an issue. We don't really want their hot takes. We want to know what they would think if they engaged in the in-depth deliberation. So you can see on the right side, some happy figures chatting. They are engaging in in-depth deliberation that changes decision-making itself through ample time, balanced information, and support to find common ground. Uh, if you recall, I wasn't crazy about using that poll early on, the statistics poll. Even if a pollster does a really good job of surveying all Americans, what do they think about some hot topic issue? They can get a nice distribution that is some sort of representative, but what is it representative of? It's representative of like a hot take. Like it's really hard for a pollster to even persuade someone to spend 5 minutes, probably more like 30 seconds, to respond to a survey. If you've also been thinking that this sounds a bit like a jury, you're right. But let me just point out a few ways in which it's a little different. A jury would have, a normal jury, 12 members. I forget the size of a grand jury, but this would have many more members, typically in the hundreds. We also wouldn't have a voir dire, which is the idea that some people can pick who should be kicked off of a jury, or in this case, a civic assembly. Also, unlike a jury, participation in a civic assembly would be optional. We would want to schedule a civic assembly on consecutive weekends to make it as accessible as possible and to not interfere with your life. But like juries, we believe this is a fundamental form of justice. Juries have survived the test of time. However, there are some shortcomings. So a little more in depth about the process. So it would begin with a random selection of people through a democratic lottery, followed by that in-depth deliberation and learning phase, and it would result in a rough policy consensus. However, there is disagreement for each of these steps in how exactly they should be, how exactly they should be implemented. Some people advocate that we need to ensure that there is an equal representation of men and women, or ethnicities should be exactly representative of the local population. In the deliberation stage, there's a big trade-off in, well, how many people do we want? If you have thousands of members, it's very difficult to have conversations and learn to trust each other. But if you have a very, very small amount, you're no longer representing the people, and there's going to be voices that are unheard. And then finally, should these civic assemblies be simply providing a recommendation? Or should we consider that their decisions be actual judgments that society live by? I don't pretend that these are trivial matters. I will say that there has been a lot of thought and theory dedicated to these ideas that I'll provide some links to later, and I genuinely believe that this method strives to and can provide creative and durable solutions to community problems. And I have seen, although only in model civic assemblies that I've participated in, I have seen genuine high quality deliberation, balancing of trade-offs, and people actually trying to come up with solutions. I've never been on the floor of Congress, but it sure seems like those people are playing a game of swapping deals. It doesn't seem like they're genuinely coming up with solutions in a cooperative manner. And if if it sounds pretty crazy to think of this as a replacement for Congress, I mean, yeah, it is crazy. However, it is also an ancient idea. So here's a quote from Aristotle. It is regarded as democratic when the officers are assigned by lot and as oligarchic when they are elected. Now, I'm not a huge Greek scholar, and it has to be said that their selection by lot was still only among male land-owning citizens. So I think we could do a much more equitable job of that. But I do think it's interesting to note that in America, our founding fathers sort of intentionally chose a Republican form of government. And this was thought to avoid mob rule, and the ways in which they considered it democratic over time was mostly through the voting mechanism, which seems to be, at this point, I'm a little unsure. Like, is voting actually providing this representation of the people, for the people, by the people that we've been promised? And whatever you sort of think about our founders' intents, it sure seems that we've ended up with a kind of political aristocracy that really functions as a kind of special interest all on its own. So here's a poll conducted by the Sortition Foundation in the UK. Who do you trust more to make policy recommendations? Members of a citizens' assembly, 57% responded yes. 31% responded they don't know. And 14% of the members of parliament responded that, 14% responded that they trusted members of parliament more. Um, Now, 1 hour ago, I went through this and I realized that if you sum these numbers up, you reach 102%. So I was sitting there laughing because I literally had in my source notes that trusting these reports and statistics is dangerous. And the only reason I found this error is because I was wanting to pose the question, how come 31% didn't know? And how did the 69% actually have an opinion on this? And then I can tell you the answer, which this is another statistic that I'm about to give you, that there have been 600 civic assemblies in the last 20 years all across the world. Maybe Alex in the chat knows the source of that statistic. I don't know, but I can tell you I have researched a number of these online, and you can too. There definitely have been civic assemblies in Ireland where they dealt with the question of marriage equality, reproductive rights, climate change, drug use. In Brussels, they dealt with homelessness, biodiversity, employment and job training. And in France, end of life, climate change, also homelessness. And in the United States, you have examples of city council compensation, housing codes, land use, and childcare. Other proposed topics of civic assemblies: public transportation, zoning policy, gun control, something as simple as dog park versus playground in your local community, the land value tax, which is my passion. So if anyone wants to ask me where the board game Monopoly came from afterwards, I will tell you the whole history. And then finally, insert your cause here, because that's what a civic assembly can do. It can take the issues of the people and address them head on. There are many different sort of proposals of using civic assemblies. Currently, most civic assemblies that I've ever looked into are purely advisory bodies. Terry Baricius has a multi-body sortition proposal where he would want actually the first civic assembly to simply be deciding what the agenda would be for later civic assemblies, and that whole system would be completely absent elections in total. It is quite radical. Maybe a less radical option is the elections by jury proposal, which is if on any ballot, when you don't know or just don't prefer any of the options, you'd be able to just check a box saying, hey, let's form a jury, and this jury will have time and resources, and they can evaluate this, either a proposition or this position or these candidates. They will make a choice, and you're going to delegate your choice to that. And then maybe the most radical is the Assemble America proposal for a rewriting of the Constitution for a constitutional convention. And then my favorite application, well, not my favorite, but one I love is that if you were to apply the same methodology of sortition as we do for civic assemblies to your playground, I like to tell kids that they should make dodgeball teams by random selection rather than through picking captains where players' feelings get hurt. I sort of give these examples as to demonstrate that the sortition part is a very powerful tool. It's used in science, and we can use it in our own governance. So why should we consider civic assemblies and sortition? What about other forms of reform? One that's commonly proposed is voting reform. And this video from Veritasium, which is 23 minutes, we're not going to watch, it ultimately goes through a very interesting deep dive into a bunch of different proposals for voting reform. You may have heard of ranked choice voting. There's many others. There's star voting, approval, Condorcet, quadratic, and so on. And the conclusion of this video that aligns with a lot of math and theory is that none of these methods exactly meet all the criteria we want from a voting system. What this, the title of this though, video, Why Democracy is Mathematically Impossible, I want to argue that that's wrong. What it doesn't recognize is that voting systems, whichever one you adopt, you're still selecting from a consistent pool of people we know by definition had the time and resources to run for office, and two, they made the choice to run for office. Now, the choice to run for office, that could be a noble thing or a benign thing, or, it could signal some kind of, desire to rule the whole wide world forever and ever. You can tell me how you feel about people who run for office at another time. But we can know for certain that that our candidate pools come from a kind of uniform background, and there's very little diversity or actual representation of the population. In this way, I feel that voting reform is insufficient to actually provide us the representation of democracy that we want. I'm not going to go into all of these other possible reforms. I would recommend anyone go to this website, democracycreative.substack.com. It's written by Terry Bericious. He was a state senator alongside Bernie Sanders in Vermont, and he addresses all of these topics in more detail. Term limits, yes, individuals may accumulate less power, but perhaps you're going to end up with stronger party machines. Compulsory voting, yes, you'll get literally more voter turnout, but does that mean that voters are going to be well educated and actually study these issues, or will they be rationally ignorant? Proportional representation, Terry isn't quite so negative on this, but he argues that similar to the voting reform, it's pretty inescapable with elections that you're going to be left with people who are either themselves wealthy or they're backed by wealthy interests that are able to get them into office. A lot of people criticize Citizens United. I criticize the Citizens United finding. This was a legal ruling about corporations being able to donate to political campaigns. For sure, that should be repealed, but that was in 2010. Do you think that our system was working incredibly well through the 2000s or through the 20th century. I'm not so sure. And then I often hear just more casual comment from people in my life that you just got to get the adults in the room. And that's like not a solution. The idea like, oh, we just didn't get the right guy this time. I just don't buy it. I don't have a great response to that. It just seems a little silly to me. What struck me deep about learning about this topic was when Terry Barishas talked about rational ignorance, and that nailed me. I haven't voted in 10, maybe 15 years, because it's simple if you think about it. In California, when your vote is 1 in 39.5 million people, yes, that's the population. I don't know how many of them are voters. Does it make a lot of sense to spend 1, 2, or really 100 hours doing the research before each election? And how often do we think elections actually result in electing the best among us? And if it can't get the best among us, how well do these elections work in holding people accountable? If you have to pay for rent or provide for a child or care for an aging parent, are you going to risk a run for Congress to unseat someone better funded, better known? How well do people in DC understand your life versus someone your age, your ethnicity, your job, and with your debt? How many countries have elections? Like, these are somewhat obvious questions that I feel like kids ask, and we kind of just forget that they don't have we don't have a good answer for this. And I posit that voter disengagement is not irrational. I found this image online, and it struck me that yes, it's been quite easy to turn us against each other as we live in basically a system that weaponizes our own rationality against us. It's my belief that most humans do not really seek to dominate or harm others, and they consider it quite fair to have to share the resources of Earth. I also, through my own studies in the sciences, it's very clear to me that we have like so much technology. We have, in sort of a video game terminology, we have unlocked the tech tree of Earth, that it's very hard to understand why anyone lives in poverty. And at the end of the day, it really seems like government is simply this coordination problem. And it does seem a little silly to say that the solution could be something like picking random neighbors and friends and maybe some annoying people and to get them in a room and talk every once in a while. But at the end of the day, we are all just humans, and we've tried a lot of other options. This one really, you know, I've seen it now in person in the model civic assemblies, and I urge you to consider it as something worth your time. So thank you for the time you spent here. Let me know if you have any questions. And these are just some organizations and some blogs, and there's my blog at the bottom. I talk a lot about taxation there, not quite fully focused on civic assemblies, but that is my presentation. So thank you for your time.